People who are trickling in join us. So again, welcome from wherever you are in the world, and we have, based on the registrations, quite a global audience today. Really want to thank you for joining us for a very interesting talk, and I'm really happy that Lauren has agreed to host this along with some fantastic panelists, whom I'll allow her to do a proper introduction. Let me just kind of go through a few kind of ground rules and kind of some kind of the general outline for this session today. First off, if you can, or can you please just mute your mic until we open it up for kind of Q&As or type of questions. If you guys have any questions, or if there's anything that you want the speakers to kind of note as we go along, there is a chat or Q&A function at the bottom of your screen that you should have access to. So what we'll do is we'll do some very quick introductions, myself, the OBA Los Angeles chapter, and then we'll just jump into it. It'll be very, what I believe is going to be a very fascinating and very relevant topic, especially given the climate in which we are currently living in today. So let me just start off by introducing Lauren Xandra. She is the Vice President at the National Research Group, a global insights and strategy firm, really intersecting entertainment and technology. Before that, she's been a writer around and a speaker on emerging technologies such as AR, VR, 5G, AI. And she's also a co-founder of Women in STEAM, a nonprofit catalyzing new ways of thinking, working, and creating through STEM and arts programming. She holds a BA from NYU and a master's from the University of Oxford in history of art and visual culture. And with that, I will let her kick off today's main event. Off to you, Lauren.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the intro. I appreciate it, and happy to be here. I'm just gonna share my my screen, so making sure that you've got that. Okay, great. So since February, we've been tracking the impact of coronavirus on consumer values and behaviors in 13 countries around the world. And today I'm going to walk you through our latest study, The Great Refresh. The study brings to light how, in the process of disrupting how we live, work, and interact, coronavirus is also leading Americans to reappraise our relationship with technology, and we think this is a trend that will persist globally. And following this presentation, we'll open up to a fireside chat featuring futurist and LinkedIn top tech voice Kathy Hackle, as well as media innovator Adora Udoji, who leads corporate innovations and venture programs at our lab in New York, which is focused on the next generation of user interfaces. And together, we'll really turn a corner and look towards Corona's lasting impact on innovation across education, healthcare, and business and communications. And at that point, we'll open up to audience Q&A as well. So today's economic downturn is comparable in scale to that of the 1930s, but it's very different in nature. In the Great Recession, economics drove decision-making. There were a few bad actors, particularly in mortgage and banking industries, who made some bad bets that caused destruction throughout society. And now we're in a simultaneous health and economic crisis. Amazingly, we've lost a decade of job gains in 1 month, and yet still human values are driving decision-making. In the face of immense tragedy and disruption, about 9 in 10 Americans say COVID-19 is a good time to reflect on what's important to them. This is actually double the number of people who say they're too stressed to focus on the positive or use this as a period for improvement. COVID-19 is really accelerating our digital transformation through the way we think, work, and support one another as a society. And in the process of transitioning to a digital-first culture, consumers are hitting refresh, so to speak, on our relationship with technology. Gone are the days when technology was seen as a polarizing force in society, predominantly privacy, misinformation, antitrust, to technology realizing its leadership promise in this unique moment. And we'll get into the whys driving this shift. So pre-COVID-19, techlash was fueled by high-profile violations of public trust, ranging from the role of coordinated disinformation campaigns in elections around the world, to the Cambridge Analytica scandal, to accusations of anti-competitive practices that have resulted in billions of dollars in fines. And the disruptions created by the COVID-19 pandemic are wide-ranging. Our research supports the notion that the current global crisis may be turning the tide against this wave of techlash. Incredibly, we see 9 in 10 working Americans now have a better appreciation for technology. So the vast majority, about 2 in 3 Americans, are excited about how tech can accelerate positive trends they want to see continue on the other side of the curve. And these are the most valued innovation areas. A more productive, informed, and efficient society. So with shoppers now making nearly 10% more of their meals at home, the supply chain is struggling to keep up. And consumers want to see continued innovation around fast grocery, food delivery services with real-time stock updates, as well as new apps that help us track and improve other areas of society more effectively. A more global workforce and connected social communities. Of course, in recent weeks, we've seen global downloads of Skype, Zoom, house parties surge by over 100%. We've also seen a big boom in virtual live experiences that bring us closer together now that we're further apart. And one of particular note was Travis Scott's concert in Fortnite that commanded about 28 million unique players in-game for an immersive shared experience for fans everywhere in the world, blending the best of streaming, gaming, and live experiences. And when we look at innovations in healthcare, we're seeing a varied slate of innovation, from leveraging smartwatches or tools that monitor fitness to detect early signs of sickness, through to supercomputers running faster disease simulation to speed up vaccine development. And walled gardens are opening up, with Apple and Google teaming up on a comprehensive opt-in contact tracing solution. And it's through this innovation that consumers are realizing the benefits of sharing our most personal information, not to be targeted by advertising, but rather in return for enhanced health and safety. Tech is, of course, playing an absolutely essential role in us being able to work from home, maintain relationships, and cope with the crisis. And crisis really presents a revived appreciation for what matters, with tech as the enabler for connecting to our passions and purpose. By getting in touch with what matters, we're changing in both small and big ways. It's the search for self-regulation and control in a world where science fiction is now more like nonfiction. So when we ask consumers how they're allocating their free time in quarantine, what they're doing more of, we see 92% turning to more wellness and self-care to feel productive and safe, 89% leaning into more entertainment when they need to escape, and 83% reaching out and communicating with others more to stay connected. And incredibly, we see 1 in 3 Gen Z adults now cooking, meditating, and exercising for the first time. And these aren't just temporary elixirs, really. The biggest proof point and how much consumers are finding value in their habits, with about 8 in 10 saying they hope they'll stick even after this pandemic subsides, does not succeed. So we'll walk through some of the most sticky solutions we see emerging out of this crisis, and we really believe that the longer the situation lasts, the more pervasive these will be. So we'll start with learning and working. Beyond the need for our tools to catch up to support our nearly overnight shift into a work from home norm, the need for e-learning is also sudden and significant, from families adjusting to school closures to medical professionals continuing to practice important procedures from home. In fact, around 7 in 10 consumers would find interactive learning or skill development useful, learning by doing rather than seeing, with interactive tutorials guiding you every step of the way. Connection. The #1 behavioral change people say is having a positive impact on their lives that they hope will stick is changed communication, led by talking to loved ones more frequently. People are really hungry for solutions that can connect us in more meaningful ways, and more authentic ways too. That's why we're seeing some really whimsical cultural memes trending, such as lockdown citizens dressing up to take out their trash, craving a sense of purpose and to still feel like themselves, or the viral deepfake of Italians singing pop songs on their balconies near and far. They're connecting in more real ways about who they are in this strange moment. We look to entertainment and expression. We see the content industry finding very clever ways to foster social connection. Riffing on Netflix's House Party co-viewing feature, Amazon has found a way to monetize its Prime Video catalog, letting top Twitch live streamers host watch parties, providing commentary along a selection of movies and TV shows in their slate. And in addition to a trend towards co-viewing, we're witnessing a unique trend towards co-creating and world-building experiences. Consumers want an outlet that's not a trip to Hawaii, say, but rather a more consistent fantasy that will make us feel safe. That's why we see Animal Crossing skyrocket as the #1 most talked about game in the world. It transports players to a parallel universe, this whimsical island where goals feel attainable and within reach. And improvement. Our lifestyles have converged to be very similar and far less upbeat or glamorous than before. Content and social media platforms that thrive on silliness, interaction, and sharing will need to go beyond the happy, shiny lifestyles and help people with tools for different situations, providing the tools we need to succeed and thrive, and enough creative freedom to shape what that may look like. So critically, the common enemy of the virus can bring us closer together when what affects one person affects everyone everywhere. We think more realness is inevitable as we enter this uncharted territory. Our kids, cats, and spouses often inelegantly interrupting our Zoom calls. The shared challenge of balancing competing work and life home responsibilities is creating a culture where serendipity is more appreciated than ever. So we think that leaders will really need to lean into this great refresh by tapping into a new set of values. Self-care. Never has it been clearer that self-care is intertwined with productivity, and marketers will encourage new ways of learning and working, all the while enabling social connectedness and supporting mental health and well-being. Reprioritized intimate relationships. So while IRL or in real life experiences will look different, the promise remains the same. Consumers have big pent-up demand for experiences like movie-going even, where they can get out of the house and spend quality time with friends and family. We're only going to see added emphasis on the intimate over the communal. More trust and creativity. When our business calls become these gatherings of snap filters, new contexts, even business environments, are inviting in play and expression. From developing new hacks to cope with this strange reality to coming up with clever ways to express ourselves across screens, we're seeing ripe opportunities to give users the tools to get creative and share with one another. Digital spaces are really this prime real estate for creativity. They're playgrounds to be anybody. And play and self-expression. With COVID-19, people are getting more in touch with their goals and are getting more creative about who they are, how they want to express themselves and share that. We see COVID-19 accelerating a trend towards people finding their place in virtual communities, not physical ones, leveraging online platforms to live out every aspect of their day-to-day, from learning and working to gaming and sharing. So ironically, perhaps there are opportunities to live more holistically and even be more real in these digital environments versus the physical world. And with that, we will turn to dialogue with our panelists. So Adora and Kathy, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Wonderful.
Thanks for the invitation.
Yep.
So to kick off, we touched on a big perceptual shift away from techlash. And while the COVID-19 situation presents big opportunities for tech companies to step in and solve problems where governments have struggled or failed, these are, of course, also treacherous waters to navigate when it comes to new precedents around privacy and data sharing. And so identifying the potential reputational risks will be just as important as identifying the most meaningful ways to help. From your perspectives, how do people want the tech industry to step in and contribute to the COVID-19 response, recovery, and rebuilding in the US?
I can go first. I'll just jump in there. We
Great.
work with a cross-section of stakeholders, both in New York City, across the country, and all over the world, who are working on these new applications. So I work with startups, I work with academics, researchers from NYU Tandon School of Engineering runs our lab, along with Columbia University, CUNY, and the New School. So we work across all of these stakeholders, developers, technologists, corporations, investors, and so on. And I think it's such a maker mindset, the people who are building and applying these new applications. So they are certainly looking for ways to apply and or use and or explore ways that their technologies can materially support this effort, which is so broad, meaning the impact of COVID, whether it's on the healthcare side, it's on the tracing side, it's on the economic side, the corporate side. We've been surveying some of our startups, and we've worked with dozens and dozens and have had hundreds of applications, globally for our programs. And many of them are saying that they're shifting their products a little bit in response to the pandemic. We have one startup, Verti, which was in our accelerator last fall, that is a training platform, and they just rolled out to scale through the NHS, which is the largest healthcare system in the UK, to many hundreds of thousands of workers, helping to keep them apprised of the types of protocols and the ways that they need to be going about their daily activities, saving lives every day, and keeping them up to date on the latest best practices as they're being learned. And so they are prepared to work with the patients and the people who are contracting this virus. So I think there's some level of expectation that there's support that's to be had in and among these variety of communities who are working on this technology.
And to add to that, I think that people are also expecting, at least on some level, for their data to be used responsibly, if possible. I think that that's kind of a bit of an illusion in some ways, right? But I think that, but with contact tracing and everything that's going on, especially here in the US, I think people are like, okay, use my data, use my location, to help, for the greater good. And people are fine with that. I wonder if, let's say 12, 24 months later on, like we find out, possibly this was used for something that was not as positive, as more nefarious, and the kind of conversations we're going to have, right? And when we start to think about not only contact tracing, but when we're going into potentially, going back into what I'm calling, going into the new future, not so much the new normal, but kind of the new future, and let's say you go into your place of work and you get scanned for temperature without you even knowing. You're being monitored much more so than you were before. I think that brings up a lot of questions, right? And I think as workers, we want to feel safe, and we're okay with that. But I want to make sure we have those conversations right now, so that, like I said, not down the line we don't realize this data was sold for X, Y, or Z, or was sold to use our gaits and our eye tracking for something nefarious. So I think it's definitely conversations to be had right now, as some of these tech companies become even more powerful because of the pandemic.
So one of the key ways that the tech companies are so valuable in this pandemic, as largely that they're some of the only companies still hiring professional services roles, and not necessarily the essential frontline workers, but many are looking to big tech for these policy decisions. They were the first to initiate shelter from home. They're providing stimulus to the economy, not only to workers, but even to their advertisers in some cases. How do you think that technology can help solve the challenges we face for our economy of the future, from supporting small businesses through to matching talent with jobs, or designing new skills for a more competitive workforce?
I think what seems to be what's really interesting, and I was struck by your survey. It's a fantastic snapshot, right? And I think indicative of the acceleration of this trend of ever becoming more dependent on technology in every part of our lives. And so now there seems to be this level of acceptance around the fact that these current technologies, as well as some of these new technologies, are just going to be critically fundamental across every way that we live, right? And so we see an acceleration of relying on these devices to bring us into the digital world, and where we are essentially having this like parallel life experience to what we were experiencing 3 months ago when we were in person. And I mean, the tech companies play an incredible role, but I would also argue that, and I'd love to hear what you think, Kathy, that what makes this next generation of technology, and Lauren, you've heard me talk about this before, really interesting, is it's not totally top down. In other words, somebody would hand you a smartphone and they don't care what you use it for, or they give you PowerPoint software, right? It doesn't matter. You could be a clown in a circus, or you could be a brain surgeon. You would take that and you would use it for whatever your purpose is. A lot of this next generation of user interfaces, particularly in spatial computing, AI, voice, gestures, VR, AR, they're really dependent upon the use case. And so you need the subject matter expert to be in the room collaborating with the technologists. And that's why you see a lot of these tech companies building out like health lines of businesses and or education lines of businesses. But they're hiring teachers, right? Because they need to understand how the industry works and what some of the pedagogy is around education. So it's this collaboration that I see that's going to be ramped up in material ways. I mean, I think about one of our companies in New York that came out of NYU, was founded by two doctors. One is a brain surgeon, the other one's a radiologist. The company's called is MetaVise. It's one of the first companies to get FDA approval to use their AR technology for surgeons preparing for surgery. And I've heard one of the co-founders, who's a brain surgeon, say, with this AR tool, I now have 100% more information about the medical imagery of this individual and who they are than I did before. And I think everyone on this call would agree, you want your brain surgeon to have 100% more information. That's not something a technologist, a coder, a systems engineer would have come up with, right? They had to work together to create this application that's materially meaningful. And we're going to see a lot of that, particularly around critical areas right now today, which are education, right? Everyone's moved online. Healthcare, right? You need to see a doctor, now you need to do it on Zoom. And so there'll be a next generation of what this telemedicine looks like, right? Or industrial, manufacturing. Maybe you're going to be sitting at home moving the robot's arms, right? Using VR and AR. platform. I mean, I'll stop there, but there's a lot of collaborating that has to happen. So it's not going to be just the tech companies driving something by themselves, because it can't work that way. Actually, they have to engage with these various industries and the experts in these various industries to make meaningful beyond just the basic enabling technology that we'll also see.
To add to, oh, go ahead.
Sure. No, I was just going to say, I mean, given your expertise in emerging technologies and AR, VR, mixed reality in particular, I'd love to hear how you think these innovations will play a role too, not only the technology companies in the industry, but how will these technology innovations change what major elements of society like healthcare will look like?
Oh, 1 second. Sorry about that. Sorry about that. So this is kind of what I'm seeing, because I've been able to work, you know, on the side of the, let's say, the developer shops that create the solutions in AR and VR, but I've also been in the OEM side. So most recently, I was with Magic Leap as part of their enterprise team. So we had to do a lot of exactly what Adora was talking about, was kind of making sure that, yes, you had the hardware, which is the product, et cetera, which allows people to access that solution, but also become that translator in some way between, you know, the people that are, you know, the coders and the people that are creating the product and the providers of the solution and the actual end user, right, and the client. And what problem does it really solve at the end of the day? So I think that it's really interesting to watch how that's going to change. Just this morning, I was talking to a company that's been in the AR, let's say, solution space for a long time, and they're doing really well. Like, they are in a state of growth. They're closing lots of deals because they work specifically in the manufacturing side with the frontline workers. So they've seen that kind of that area of growth, right? It doesn't mean that other areas are going to grow as well or as fast, or, you know, are doing well. But I do think we are going to see that push towards having, you know, that translation, that liaison, whether it's an educator or whether it is, you know, someone in the medical sciences. I think we're going to see a lot of philosophers and a lot of anthropologists also get hired further into tech.
Yeah,
when you talk about human values being kind of the reason behind some of the decisions we're going to make, I think we're going to start to value those people even more when deploying you know, solutions, technology out there in the world. So very interesting. I did want to make a point when we're talking about the economy of the future and talk a little bit about what you were referencing when it came to Animal Crossing and these virtual spaces, this duality that we have right now, where physical and digital lives and kind of them coming together. And I had shared this with you guys earlier today, is, you know, my children are learning at home. You know, it's been a challenge. But what I have found is that, yeah, well, they're doing online school. It's fine. You know, it's been okay. But when they have time off because they can't have play dates and they can't have that social interaction, they've been spending a lot of time on, you know, platforms like Minecraft or Roblox. They're a little younger, so not so much Fortnite. But when I asked them a few days ago and I said, guys, if you had to explain to someone what Roblox is, they literally responded, oh, mommy, it's a community instead of a video game. And I think that goes to that idea of humanity, socializing, and how we view that, you know, because my answer would have been, oh, it's a video game, right? So user-generated content, it's a video game. To them, it's a community. That's where they're socializing and they're seeing their friends. So I think that's going to be an important part of the economy of the future, whether we're in the pandemic or not.
And I think, and just to build out another slice of that table, which is the worker, right? The role of the worker at the center of working with this variety of different technology, number one. But number two, reimagining what some of these roles are. Like, I've done a lot of work in AI, and I worked on a project with IBM, and one of their clients is Autodesk. And these teams that they're building around virtual assistants and chatbots and so on and so forth, these teams include like creative linguists. And screenwriters. I mean, I don't think most screenwriters would have ever thought they would end up working for a company like Autodesk. Just wouldn't have, but they need their expertise around creating these conversations that this artificial intelligence is having with their consumers, right? And then they're redefining the nature of like what customer service agent means so that they can focus on different roles. So they're not replacing them, customer service reps necessarily, but they're enhancing their ability to deal with the higher priority items, right? And you think about gamers, right? Gaming has always been in such like a bucket of its own. I mean, it's just $1 trillion industry. Now the game engines, arguably are going to become the type of software that we use to generate all content, because you can animate and it's 3-dimensional and so on and so forth. People who have those skills and know the game engines really well are being heavily sought after. They're heavily sought after, not just by the tech companies, but by healthcare companies, by industrial manufacturing companies, by media and entertainment companies, beyond gaming. They need those skills in order to start developing this next generation of content that they need for whatever their purpose is. So we're reimagining how we live and how we interact socially and at work and so on, but we're also totally redefining the nature of what some of these roles will be. I mean, think about it. 10 years ago, I think the best metaphor I've come up, or analogy I've come up with, is how many Fortune 1000 companies globally had social media teams? Probably not a lot. But now today, how many don't have them? Probably like 0. Right? They all have someone who's doing some sort of work, because even if you're a B2B, B2B2C, or B2C business, you still can't just put a Post-it note on your website with your address and a picture of the building where you work. You have to engage the world in a way that you never had to before. And that's going to be the truth in 10 years from now. And I think it's abundantly clear that all of these technologies that we're talking about, VR, AR, and we can call them whatever, but just this ability to create 3D three-dimensional digital assets and place them in the world around us is abundantly clear that we're going to continue to innovate against that.
And building on that, I'd love to think about how building 3D assets and integrating it in the world around us spatially is impacting how we're designing healthcare and education programs.
Well, at NYU Langone, the medical school, they have reduced their use of cadavers for first-year students, and they have built out modules, both virtual simulation programs, but also 3D anatomy models. And they are utterly fascinating. I wish I had pictures. I mean, I might be a doctor had I learned the heart, like literally how it is and how it's placed in the body, right? Now they have the ability to run virtual simulations. You might be in the ER for whatever your rotation is and never see some rare condition, but now they can create virtual simulations and you can practice it 1,000 times, right? So by the time you actually face it, you'll know, and you can do that with 1,000 different very rare cases. That enhances the way that you look at your role as a doctor. And so the anatomy models, the bet there's a lot of research happening, is that it's much easier to learn about the body. I didn't know this before I got into this, but apparently there's a lot of brain capacity used up by first-year medical students in learning 2D. You're learning it all 2D, but then you have to apply it in 3D, right? Because our bodies are not 2D. Like our heart doesn't look like this. Instead, our body like this, right? And so now they're learning about the body and all the parts that go into it, in space, but also relative to how they're actually sit in the human bodies. And they're reactive, right? Cadaver, you can't simulate some sort of scenario like the heart attack or an aneurysm. I'm making these up, but there's just a lot of flexibility that's now being built into the way that we're training doctors, and we'll be upskilling them. So that's incredibly exciting.
And to add to that, there's a very, let's say, I think it's a very timely use case. There's a company called Seek VR run by Mary Spio. And one of the things that they had done, and this is before COVID, is that they had created a training for anesthesiologists for practicing the intubation process. So when someone has to be on a ventilator, they have to be intubated. And that process is a complicated process that when done wrong can cause a lot of damage. So they had already created this simulation teaching module for anesthesiologists before. So what's more relevant than right now, being able to practice that, right? These newer students that are graduating and are getting thrown into, the pandemic healthcare system, if they're able to practice that before they intubate me or a family member, I'm glad that exists, right? Instead of just seeing it on a flat screen. I'm really interested about the health tech system of the future. But I think that there's a part of, let's say, call it healthcare, that I think is ripe for disruption and innovation. And I think that is the death tech side of it. All right. What happens when you die? What happens to your body? You're seeing this in New York. You're seeing this in all these different countries. And I don't mean to get morbid, but I do think about, those trucks, those bodies that are refrigerated outside of these hospitals. And where the bodies are going to be buried and everything. And you start to think about, why hasn't the way we bury people or we do something with the bodies after they're dead, why hasn't that changed? Like, why are we still doing the same things that we're doing? So I think that from conversations I've had with some stealth startups, I think you're going to start to see disruption there, because there needs to be disruption with everything that we're seeing right now. So, really interesting. I also want to mention something, Lauren. When you showed the picture, you showed a picture of the mirror, which is kind of that exercise mirror where people exercise. I have one at home, and I will tell you, it is life-changing and fantastic. I'm not a Peloton person. I'm not going to get on the bike, and if people love that, that's great. Peloton's doing fantastic during this pandemic. But mirror for me has been really interesting. And basically, it's a mirror, and I have an instructor in front of me, and I do classes with them. So it's having that personal trainer at home. I see that, that's probably going to translate into a lot more things at home, So yeah, I can't wait to have a famous chef on my mirror, right? Walking me through a special cuisine or something. So.
Absolutely. And I think that raises a really critical.
I'm sorry, Lauren, forget the screen. I mean, we're moving to like a frameless world. It's not even, they're just going to pop up. They're going to be talking to you as you're trying to, and that's near and it's far. It's definitely going to happen within, some number of, it's not going to be 50 years. It'll be long before that, but that's where we're going. And that's just the reality. So we're preparing for that on many levels, like right now, in the way that people are developing products and thinking about frameworks to innovate against those new products.
And I don't mean to jump in, but that brings up another point when it comes to, our digital legacy and how we live on in a digital way when we pass away, right? I think that's a whole other webinar that we could do related to that. But I have friends in Hollywood right now that are digital legacy consultants. They're pretty much digital embalmers. They are helping, Hollywood heavyweights figure out who owns their tweets, their videos. Can they be brought back as a hologram? Can someone keep my DNA and bring me back? That's
what we got volumetric and virtual production and AI. This idea of sentient beings is not ridiculous. I think people watch too many Avenger movies. We're not quite there yet, right? But we're not that far away either. So, but these are all in the realm of like a product roadmap. If you think about, adding various features, and there's all sorts of 5G technology that will be enabling, and no doubt these processors will get more powerful, and the more powerful processing will get smaller. It's like this constant, it's like if anybody thinks the smartphone that you have in your bag is that's ridiculous. My daughter, she's 11. When she's my age, she's not going to be having some smartphone. It's just, I don't know what it's going to be, but it's not going to be that.
No, and I think the example too of having the smart mirror and smart ways of working out is just one example of how we'll move beyond the screen in terms of like the most valuable tools for how we can improve ourselves through a varied slate of virtual solutions. Importantly, too, we're spending more and more time in these virtual or just not physical environments. And that seems to be a huge part of how we can best reimagine how we live and interact. We spoke earlier about Animal Crossing and Roblox. I think these virtual environments are a community in a way that many of us here and adults have not experienced. It's not like social media where there's consequence, where it's about status or it's competitive. Often these are very experimental places where kids are trying on new identities, changing their avatar moment to moment. There are these spaces for learning new social skills. At the same time, there are growing concerns around mental health with kids and adults spending so much time on the screen. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on how tech can better facilitate social connectedness, but also support mental health, well-being, self-improvement.
Before we get to that, do you mind if I just answer? Somebody asked a question about healthcare, and I just wanted, since we just talked about healthcare, but they asked, how do we see healthcare innovation occurring in developing countries? I think that's an utterly fascinating question, because as we know, the saturation level around smartphones is like doubling and tripling every year. So that's a really good thing, because you need a lot less infrastructure than you like for. It's one thing to have a hospital to provide, healthcare. It's another thing to have a mobile phone and telemedicine, or that can address some minimal problems that a hospital would have had to take care of before. So I think there's a number of applications that are going to provide a level of access that didn't exist. And that's increasingly encouraging, not to mention the fact that there are so many brilliant minds all over the world in pockets really taking a look at this technology, whether it's applied to agriculture, whether it's applied to healthcare, whether it's applied to all of the critical components of how to feed people, how to house people, how to communicate in material ways. I think that there are some really exciting elements in the healthcare space, and I think that telemedicine is definitely one of them. I also think it's training, right? Because now you have the ability for resources in developing countries. I mean, I lived in Nigeria. My dad's from Nigeria. I lived in Nigeria. I spent a lot of time in Central Asia and a lot of different communities of developing communities around the world. So I'm well acquainted with what some of the real challenges are in those places. And so I think that there's a lot to be really encouraged around, because the training is also really important so that you can galvanize your resources, right? And provide that kind of interactivity with experts all over the world. They can witness procedures and protocols in real time. They can see surgeries in real time. So there's a lot of transfer. There's a lot of transfer of knowledge and skill setting and potential treatment and therapies that can be used through some of these evolving technologies, especially as they get cheaper and they get faster in being able to get access through a variety of different devices.
Excellent. We had another question come in. Face-to-face interaction probably is something wired in us through evolution. Do you think virtual interaction can completely replace face-to-face interactions without the negative consequences dominating?
So I don't think it can replace them right now. I don't think it'll necessarily ever replace them 100%. I do think that sometime, maybe 10, 15 years from now, there will be a hybrid of interacting between human to human, human to virtual being, or human to, bringing back, for example, having an interaction with my grandma who's already deceased, right? And having, well, she looks like a human to me because she's brought back as a hologram or whatever you want to call it. I think that there will be some of that, maybe not so much 10 years from now. I'll give you an example of something interesting that happened to me a couple weeks ago. So if you guys can see behind me is a headset, and it's pretty much a pair of glasses. It's not VR, it's a pair of glasses. Well, let's call them glasses. But basically I can see my office. If I put them on, I can see digital content in front of me, and I can see my office. And I was having a meeting using that with the sales team, and we're all wearing our Magic Leaps, and I'm seeing about 10 or 15, about 10 pretty realistic avatars of the people I was meeting with in my office, and we're looking at a spreadsheet. And my 9-year-old daughter came into the office, and she's like, "Mom, who are you talking to? Like, what's going on?" And I said, "Honey, I'm having a meeting." And I took the headset off, I put it on her, and all of a sudden she saw all these people in my office. She takes it off and she's, "Okay, Mom, I'm leaving. Finish your meeting." It was a really interesting moment for me, because it's like she got it. She saw the realistic avatars. She saw we were having. I was actually in a meeting, and that kind of was very different than when they come in and they see me on Zoom, right? This time she was like, she totally understood the gravity of it in a very different level, because there's that sense of presence, which we have right now. But I'm sure people, you're watching this, but you're checking your phone, you're writing emails. I'm sure people are doing that. So that's very different when you're in the headset.
I think it's tricky. I mean, I think we don't know, right? I mean, we talk a lot about screens and the impact it has on our ability to interact with people. I mean, I don't want to date myself necessarily, but I think it's really interesting that there's certain generations of people who've grown up with tech and texting that just would never think to call someone. Like, it's not their first reaction. They're like, "Oh, I'm just going to send them a quick note." Well, why don't you just call them? We actually need to know this like right now. And there is a lag time when you're texting. It's more convenient for you, but it's not necessarily going to provide the most immediate resolution that a phone call would if you called somebody and they actually picked up, right? They might not see that text. They might be we all know, God knows, there's not a single person on the planet who needs another email, right? Like, I wish we were all limited to 10 a day, only being able to send 10 a day. But whatever the case, so I think I often give talks about how people make technology, and I think sometimes we forget that, which is to say that technology, they're tools. I mean, these platforms, these apps, they're all tools for a variety of things. And yes, they allow us to do some things that we couldn't necessarily do in real life, but ultimately they're to the betterment of our lives, right? Whether it is entertainment or it's healthcare, we use these things because somehow they make our lives better or simpler. And so it's important to think about how we put it in its place. It can never replace totally human contact. I mean, it can't. But what does that mean at a time when we're prohibited from meeting with one another? And then what kind of habits are going to be left as a result of that? And I think, you spoke to that in the survey, where 8 out of 10 people really do hope that they're building this habit of self-care, right, into like their lives. And then there's going to be a lot of unintended consequences, as there always is, right? And it's unclear what those things are going to be. Maybe it is this idea of forget my privacy. I've just given up. There's no way around it. We're just all there. These tech companies or applications or startups are going to own my data, so I don't know, but there's definitely will be consequences, because there always are. There's always this sort of balancing act of things.
Well, before we got on the call, we all chatted, and I brought up the point of, I've been thinking a lot about this, about what are some of the things that might come from the current situation, and what if the current situation makes us a touchless society for a period of time? What does that mean? What are the implications of being a touchless society? So, I still kind of have to work through that a lot, but I've been thinking about it quite deeply. And I think that, that just is really impactful as humans, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are big implications for that in terms of touchless implies things like contactless, which applies to supply chain, how we interact with businesses, how we get from point A to point B. And it also says so much about the changing level of intimacy in our relationships, given these constraints. And also the constraints that we'll need to deal with environmentally. I know all employers are well aware that the work environments we'll be returning to will look very different out of necessity. And that's making us ask a lot of big questions about
Twitter said people don't have to go back to work. Twitter made an announcement yesterday. They said people can work from home from here going forward if they so choose. we'll just have to see what that looks like. But already a major tech company has said we're done,
Mm-hmm.
and they have thousands of employees.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that will certainly change our intimate relationships too, right? Who we will be working next to if we're in family environments, or who we choose to live with will change dramatically if we realize it's not so convenient to live with strangers anymore, even if that means saving rent. For media companies, that has implications too. Who's deciding what to watch, what to do? These are now shared decisions with very different inputs that go into each. I'd love to touch a little bit on what came up just before this, where Dora, you said, who knows, maybe the expectations for privacy will change dramatically. I'm wondering what, in your view, for both of you, what privacy trade-offs seem acceptable for managing the crisis, but really should not become the new normal? What is it we should be most wary of setting a precedent towards?
I mean, I should also mention I'm a lawyer. And so I think that, sometimes it feels like the train has left the station. It's like tech is too big and it's too ubiquitous. There's nothing we can do about it now. And I think the European Union sort of proved that otherwise, right? By creating a framework around a new way to think about these data issues. And I think at the end of the day, that would be one of these unintended consequences. I don't think anyone in any one of these tech companies said to themselves 10 years ago, I want to steal everybody's data and make money off of it. That's not exactly what happened, right? They built these platforms and then we have to come up with a business model. Oh, we can do it this way. But here we are, and it's clear that the digital world is one that we're all going to be living in for a very long time. So what does that mean relative to the rules that we want to create so that there's some level of responsibility, there's some level of accountability, right? And there's transparency, that there's real awareness to the consumers about what's being extracted from them and then how that's being used. I'm not sure what that looks like. It's a very complicated and they're very thorny issues, but I do just get concerned that when we're talking about life and death, particularly in an environment like the one that we're in right now, I mean, I think all of us would say, sure, I'm going to give up some of my privacy or all of it, right? Perhaps, I mean, I don't know, but there's much more willingness in general if I believe that my life or other lives will get saved as a result. And there is some truth to that. And so, but how do we continue the conversation and making sure that the big tech companies are engaged in that conversation, as well as the advocates, as well as researchers, as well as others, and just thinking through, I mean, this is all new. I mean, we've never been here before on any level. Right? This convergence of technology, there's never been such an explosion in the same way in the digital space of a variety of different applications. And so that extracts information from us. So I'm not sure what the answer is, but I do believe that the conversation needs to happen. And at our lab, we definitely spend time, we've done all sorts of panels on and some thought leadership around AI and ethics and VR and ethics. And so I think it's important that the conversation be kept alive.
Mm-hmm. What I will add to that, so I live in the DC area, and we can have all the conversations you want about technology, but if we're not having those conversations with representatives, with senators, with the people that are here, they're not going to understand what the implications are, right? And you go back to when Zuckerberg went to Capitol Hill and, we sell ads, Senator, right? Some of them just didn't understand what Facebook was. So I think
that was so painful.
Oh, it was painful. So, I've before this craziness happened, I've had the chance to go into the Rayburn building, and kind of demo some
Tell
of the
people what
technologies.
the Rayburn building is, Kathy.
Oh, it's part of the Senate offices. The House and Senate have different offices where the senators have their offices. It's part of Capitol Hill. So I've been able to go there and do demos for some of these senators and some of their staff to better have them understand what are these technologies, because I think we need to involve them in the conversation so that these can be had up front. Like, oh, this is really cool, but start to think about what are the implications when it comes to ethics, because then we're gonna have someone show up in Congress testifying, and they're going to say, we put 3D content in your reality, you know, Senator. There's a lot more to that. So, yeah.
And what responsibility does the big tech companies have? And does that need to be legislated, right? Is this a public policy question? Is it a US policy question? I mean, how do we deal with you know, this across the board relative to what other countries are doing or what other countries are extracting? Or, you know, we talk a lot about what's gone on with the, you know, Russian interference with our last political campaign. And, you know, and so what kind of policies are we going to be building around these very important issues? I mean, how do we address them, and how do we minimize like bad actors and bad impacts?
Yeah.
You know, whether they're intended or not, right? And so I think these are issues that need to be taken. That our politicians need to be taking some leading action on this. But Kathy's right; a lot of them just have absolutely zero idea of where.
Zero.
Yeah, which is a problem.
Before we wrap with one final question, I just wanted to make sure that the audience doesn't have any others we can address while we're all still here.
So if anyone here has any other questions, please drop that into the Q&A.
We'll give everyone a minute to think, but just in this last minute here, I'd love to hear any final words about the most striking cultural shifts or behavioral shifts that you both think might stick on the other side of the curve with technology serving this positive transformation. Any thoughts on the positive?
Yeah, I think the work that you guys are doing is really important because it's, you know, there's a couple different tracks, but ultimately it's about how people are using the technology and what they're doing in their world. And you're creating a context and a baseline for it that I think is refreshing, because I think, you know, there's certainly other data insight driven efforts, but I think there's something really consistent. And also this is what you spend so much time and energy on this, that lends itself to a great degree of credibility. I think it's hard to imagine a world we can't imagine. And so I mean, I can't even believe I work in this space. I mean, you know, 10 years ago, the job I had didn't even exist. I mean, our lab didn't exist 2 years ago. So it's this constant evolution. And I think we're moving in warp speed in some ways and slow drip in others. And so I think it's innovation never stops, it's coming. And so we want to be aware of what it is. For those attendees who will work for companies, you want to be aware of what this technology is, because maybe you can use it today, or maybe you can help facilitate the acceleration of it so that's materially helpful to you in your life. Paying attention to, you know, what the latest things are on Animal Crossing and all of these sort of games. There's actually important because there's lots of elements of those things that are going to end up in applications that we use for like work. And so it's like this big melding pot, and it feels like it's a big clump of clay, and there's going to be, the sculpting is going to happen, you know, simultaneously in a lot of different areas all at once. So I think it's exciting, and I think we also need to be thinking about what didn't happen in the last wave, right? Thinking about some of these ethics and these privacy questions. I think that's important. We should learn the lesson.
For me, like, what will the great refresh really look like? I feel like a lot of us that, you know, all of us that have been stuck at home, we've identified potential issues or problems that need to be solved, right? I'm sure that in your daily life, you've come across something, you're like, man, someone should do something about this and make my life easier, right? I think we'll see a lot of innovative solutions coming from really smart people. So yeah, we'll have to see. You know, I also worry about, you know, you're talking about self-care and how people are trying to take care of themselves, but I also think about the other side of the coin in kind of PTSD and things that will come, you know, post-traumatic stress disorder coming from what we're living through, and, you know, how that's going to affect us, how that's going to be an opportunity as well for other people for people to help people. So yeah, you know, I think it'll be a good and bad.
Appreciate that. I appreciate both of your time. Appreciate Ed and Say Business School for hosting us.
I just want to say thank you. Thank you all. This has been fascinating. Obviously, 50 minutes is not enough to get through everything, and would love to have at least another few more hours to pick your brains. But thank you so much for this. It's such a relevant topic, and it'll be interesting to see how this continues to evolve over time. But again, for those of our panelists who are joining us from the East Coast, hope you guys are staying safe and well. Lauren, thank you again. On behalf of the OBA Los Angeles chapter, I want to thank you. Again, if you guys do have any other follow-up questions from the attendees, please let us know. And then again, if that would be okay to send that off to you guys, I'd love to be able to do that. Otherwise, I hope everyone stays safe.